welcoming you to the broadcast here today of July the 23rd, a Tuesday in this year of 2024. Welcoming you to the 24/7 World Radio podcast that I engage in periodically. And today we have our most beloved guest, Brother George Widger, coming to us now on Tuesday, July the 23rd, 2024, with his series of topics that he wishes to speak about. So, Brother George, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Brother Eric. As always, it's a pleasure to be on with you.
It is. It's a pleasure to be with you, George. So what do you have for us today, my brother?
Well, my scripture verse is 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5, which states, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. And, I guess this is the second time we've tried to do this stream. And I was going to bring up something, a song by John Lennon, or performed by John Lennon in October 1971 called Imagine. You remember that tune?
Yes, I do. Try to speak clearly into the microphone, George, because if you turn away, then it gets muffled. So if you can do that, please, I'm sure our listeners would dearly appreciate it. And so would I.
Okay, and would I. Okay, so you do recall the song. So it came out in October 1971. And I don't actually remember when it did come out because I was only 2 years old. I remember hearing it years later, especially after 1980, after they decided to pull the plug on John Lennon. Now, as I said, who actually wrote it, I don't know, and it really doesn't matter. But I'll just share the lyrics with you, and don't worry, I won't offend you or your audience by trying to sing it to me because it would be offensive to me.
Okay, George, alrighty.
Okay, verse 1. Imagine there is no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there is no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living in peace. You.
Imagine all the people living in peace. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying. Yes. Imagine there's no countries. All right, here we go. You. They say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possession. I wonder if you can.
No That's Klaus Schwab. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man.
That's a good communist phrase.
Okay, imagine all the people sharing the world. You may say I am a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Okay, so that came out almost 53 years ago, more than half a century ago. And I enjoyed listening to it in the 80s on oldies rock and roll, what they now call classic rock. And actually, because it was captivating, it was hypnotizing, and I didn't really analyze the lyrics. And, because I used to think, like most people prior to conversion, I was a materialist, that what you listen to, what you read, what you watch has no impact on your soul. It has no impact on your intellect or whatever. And just like, I understand rat poisoning is sweet because it's appealing to the vermin, because otherwise they wouldn't ingest it. Well, music, literature, film, whatever, it's the same way. It has to be appealing to the flesh.
Music is preaching a philosophy. It's a religion. Every sort of music is a religion when you get right down to it, because philosophy is religion. Go ahead, brother.
Well, yes, it is. And I, as I said, during the 1980s, I went through a Beatles phase, more than a decade after they had broken up. Something I think I told you that during the 1970s, before I was a preteen, I was obsessed basically with the 1940s, specifically World War II. And then during the 1980s, I became obsessed with the 1960s. And you may be, wait a second, aren't you skipping a decade there, the 1950s? Nothing important happened in that decade. But okay, a few things like the Korean War, the French-Algerian War, the hula hoop, rock and roll, Sputnik, okay, a few things. But I wasn't really interested in looking at those events. So I became, as a teenager during the 1980s, I became concerned with the 1960s, and a major component of that decade was the music, specifically the Beatles and the British Invasion. And I was totally oblivious as to who Tavistock was, or any of those other tentacles. And now I know we've talked about the Beatles and British Invasion and so forth before, and how the Vatican and the Jesuits and Mass of Malta were ultimately involved with that. And so I just like the music simply because I like the music. And I didn't realize
they do have some very pretty melodic tunes. You cannot deny that. And I think the melody coupled with the lyrics is what creates the spell or the illusion for you to live in. And I was addicted to the Beatles. I used to learn all the leads of George Harrison. And it's a religion. So when we're dealing with this, it's a religion. It's a philosophic religion that motivates people to do things they otherwise wouldn't do for the benefit of the prince of this world and furthering his mystery of iniquity. And the devil and the Beatles were a great part in the devil's destruction or initial real destruction of Western civilization. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so now, I know you've done at least a couple of broadcasts since the 13th of this month regarding what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, and I plan on addressing that in just a moment. However, I have a couple of housekeeping items to bring up. This is something I like looking at different news sources when I'm doing my research. I'll look at CNN, the New York Times, the BBC, and so forth to get their take on things. And occasionally, believe it or not, they might actually tell the truth. So I just want to see how they spin certain events, like January 6th, or what just happened in Pennsylvania, or what's going on with Joe Biden and so forth, just to get their take. Now, to that end, I was listening to the ABC, the Australian Broadcast Corporation, not to be confused with the American Broadcast Corporation. And they'll talk about events that are going on here in Europe and so forth, and they'll talk about what's going on in Australia. Well, I understand, was it a day or two ago, the Australian Foreign Office issued a travel advisory for Australian women going to places specifically France, Paris, because there's been a whole rash of young Australian ladies being kidnapped and gang raped. And
that's what the black savages and the Muslim savages do. And that's why the white power structure serving the Pope in France brought those savages there to bastardize the French white race in conjunction with driving the white Frenchmen into outrage and into the new right. Because remember, the French are some tremendous fighters. The French Foreign Legion, their army was always known to be a very glorious and fighting army. And when you get those white Frenchmen angry, like this is what's incited them to do, the new right is coming and vengeance is coming. And that's exactly what the Pope wants. Just using these black savages and these Arab savages to institute the new right. There's just cannon fodder of what's coming. But go ahead, George.
Okay, so, well, as I said, this was the Australian Foreign Minister, I guess, out of Canberra, that issued this warning, this travel advisory. If you're a young lady going to France, do so at your own peril, because this might. However, I looked at the article three times. They adroitly didn't mention anything about who's committing these attacks, who's perpetrating these rapes, these gang rapes. And something they mentioned in the article is it seems as if that young ladies from other European countries and places like the United States and Canada, New Zealand, Australia are being targeted. I wonder what those people have in common. I have no idea.
Yeah, they're historically white, historically from Protestant nations. That's why they're being targeted. I don't see them targeting any of the Catholics, white Catholics, do you?
Well, they could very well be Catholic because they're not saying, oh,
yeah, they could be. They could be. But as far as speaking of a nation, those nations are historically Protestant, and even southern France, when you had the Huguenots in southern France, in the Vaudois there, they're targeting that area. That's why the Jesuits ran the Vichy government in France and put that savage Klaus Barbie in charge, and he did all of his pillaging and murder, and he was with the SD. And so, because they were further reducing the historic Protestant section of France. Go ahead, brother.
Okay. Well, speaking of which, or speaking of whom, you're talking about Huguenots. Do you know who Herbert Arthur Dargue was? Dague.
No, I don't.
Major General Herbert Dargue. Well, he lived from the 17th of November, 1886 until December the 12th, 1941. I'll repeat his death date, December the 12th, 1941. So this is 5 days after Pearl Harbor and 4 days after the United States had declared war against Japan, and 3 days after Germany declared war against, or I think 3 days after Germany had declared war against the United States. Okay, so why do I bring this up?
Which was an unnecessary and a great diplomatic mistake if you're thinking coincidence. But if you see that it's a conspiracy and that Hitler does this deliberately for the ultimate destruction of Germany, bringing in the United States to fight Germany now, because the United States government, the military government, was just an enemy of Japan. It wasn't an enemy of Germany. And they could have declared war on Germany, but oh no, they got Hitler to do the moving and declare war against the United States, as planned, as purposed, for the destruction of Germany. But go ahead.
Okay, so you had never heard of this General Dargue. Well,
no.
To be honest with you, until fairly recently, I had never heard of him either. And I imagine most people had not heard of him. So I'm not sure if he got the memo, or maybe he wasn't in the loop or whatever, but he wanted to conduct an investigation. Why did the United States basically get caught with its trousers down at Pearl Harbor? He said he heard rumors that there were a number of failures, such as he'd heard that at 7 o'clock in the morning on December the 7th, 7 o'clock in the morning Hawaii time, the main base was alerted that the Japanese there was a large formation of unidentified planes coming in from the northwest. And that was never relayed to the troops at Pearl Harbor or Hickenfield or wherever. So anyhow, so Dargue was going to fly from Marshall Field near Bishop, California. That's now a defunct base. But he had a little accident and crashed in the Sierra Mountains before he can make it to the Hawaiian Islands.
See.
Oh, well, these sort of things happen. Move along.
There's a long history of this kind of thing. And you just have to ask who benefits and know the facts, and then come up with a question, who benefits, and it'll bring you right to the answer. Go ahead.
Okay, so, well, I'm just presenting the facts. And I guess you'll have to draw your own conclusions.
Well, we just have to conclude that there's a great big grand conspiracy out there, and then people are conspiratorially murdered, and some by happenstance. But the backdrop is conspiracy. Jesuit conspiracy to weaken historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. And so naturally they would attack its military and deliberately have men that were killed for nothing. I was just reading a book on Nathan Bedford Forrest. Fitzhugh Lee, the son of Robert E. Lee, deliberately ordered his men to attack 6 weeks after Fort Pillow, and he deliberately attacked them. I think it's some Harper's. It's Fort Pocahontas. That's what it is. And they lost stoutly, and then all the black soldiers decided to kill them all. So they killed approximately 150 to 200 white Virginians, and no investigation was made there. Oh no, but we will attack Nathan Bedford Forrest and the Confederates for the killing of many blacks at Fort Pillow, which of course shouldn't have been done, and Forrest didn't give that order. So now we're going to do something even worse or just as bad, and the one who reports on that is a Methodist minister who in the Yankee Union Army, a black Methodist minister who later goes on to found the African Episcopal Church in America. So this is a long history, George, of conspiracy, of deliberate sacrifice of American soldiers, either in the North or the South, or even with the present military that's been set up. They will deliberately be sacrificed, like the USS Liberty or something else like that, if they decide to do that.
Okay, well, I was talking specifically about this Herbert Dard, who was conducting an investigation as to why there appeared to be such a number of irregularities as to what happened. Well, not just Pearl Harbor, but all over the Pacific, such as in the Philippines, at Clark Field, or then Clark Field, Subic Bay, Wake Island, and so forth, because he said there's no way this should have happened. You know, he said, I read things, he said the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence must have been working for Tokyo or something.
Well, they're working for the Pope. That's right. To facilitate killing of heretics and liberals that are Americans, using the Japanese to do it.
So, as I said, now I recently came across these YouTube videos about high-ranking U.S. officers who died during World War II, E5 and above, brigadier generals, major generals, and so forth. And there were some admirals as well. So I want to do at least one a week. So it'll take me about a year or so to go through the list, because I know it'll overwhelm the audience with all this information. But having just done a few,
George, my audience is never overwhelmed. They pick apart and dissect everything you say, and they have a complete handle on your conclusions. So I would venture to say none of them are ever overwhelmed. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. Maybe I should engage in truth in advertising. I don't want to be overwhelmed.
No, I can understand that. That's how I feel sometimes.
Okay, because I just wanted to give them a bite-sized sample. You know, if I just do one a week, that should be sufficient, because there are other topics we need to cover, such as what just happened, well, over the weekend with who's that old guy in the White House? Come on. Oh, Joe Biden. That's he. By the way, allegedly resigned, and I say allegedly because there's some. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Of course I do.
No, I'm not.
He resigned, and I had a talk with my beloved wife this morning, and she said, it's not the real Joe Biden, it's some other Joe Biden. I said, honey, it's the real Joe Biden. He's got the same. No, it's not. You look at him. Okay, I'm not going to argue it. So anyway, whoever this was, Joe Biden or his double, resigns, and now throws this cap to the partially mulatto Kamala Harris, because she's really not. She's very light, but she's black, and she was persecuted when she was a girl. I'm going to sing that song. So now she's running for president, and she's further outraged the white men of this country, and so they're not going to vote for her unless they're such leftist, socialist, communist swine. But in any event, the left-right paradigm is all controlled by the Jesuits, no matter who you vote for. So go ahead.
Okay, so, and I think I've mentioned this before. She has Irish blood on her dad's side, and her ancestors owned slaves. So she obviously owes blacks reparations.
Yes, she does. Maybe she can be president, and everything she does will be for reparations for the blacks. Just give them the whole country. As the radical red Republicans sought to do after the war between the states, to give the white Protestant South over to the freed blacks and the Yankee carpetbaggers to plunder and take their country from them. to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the Reconstruction Acts. So what they pulled there, now we're in the second Reconstruction. But go ahead, George.
Okay, so this is not unprecedented. So Joe Biden is the first U.S. president who's qualified for re-election to not run for re-election. The last one to do it was Lyndon Johnson back in 1968. And I guess the Jesuit said, hey, you're incredibly unpopular. There's no way you win the popular vote. Even it doesn't matter how badly we rig it. So they said, we're just going to let you finish out your term. Would that seem like a fair assessment?
Oh, yeah. Well, you're very unpopular, and it's obvious we can't fake the election like we did previously to make it look like you won, and all these doofuses would say, oh, he really won, and we voted him in there. So we can't do that anymore because there's really nobody that's going to vote for him that's going to put him in there. So we'll just have him step aside for our other little step and fetch it, Kamala Harris. But they really want to give the election to Trump, which is why they did that. Don't tell me there's not a Democratic senator or a congressman somewhere that's able to speak and debate and have a conversation. Don't tell me none of those people exist. They do.
Well, now I realize that the Democrats are supposed to be having their convention in a few weeks, the 18th or 19th of next month, and there's talk of possibly having a Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer ticket. Now I'm not sure who would have which slot.
Well, that's hilarious. Go ahead.
Could you elaborate?
Well, Gavin Newsom is a left-wing socialist, communist, Jesuit, Roman Catholic, and that woman out of Illinois, what's her name?
It's Michigan.
Yeah, out of Michigan, pardon me. She's just as bad. So the majority of the people would not vote for any of those kind of people. But then again, who cares about the vote? They have election fraud, but they can't fake the vote with those two losers.
And okay, so I, as promised earlier, and I know we did this last week, we were talking about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania on the 13th of this month, Saturday the 13th, at about 6:13 p.m. Eastern, local time. So according to the official narrative, this 20-year-old young man, Thomas Matthew Crooks, had got an AR-15 and went to this event. Now, according to mainstream accounts, the shooting took place just after 6 p.m., but people saw him at least 3 hours ahead of time, around 3 p.m. So how is it he was able to wander around nonchalantly as if he owned the place?
Yeah, walking around nonchalantly. Very good, George. Acting like he owned the place, and the cops letting him do it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, I know we talked about this last week, and you mentioned this on a broadcast last week, but just as a quick reminder, the head of the Pennsylvania State Police is Christopher Paris, as in like the town in France. As you said, he got his undergrad degree from Scranton University. I was going to say St. Joseph. Well, is there a difference? But something I forgot to mention is he also went to Scranton University Prep School. So he was trained by the Jesuits for 8 years.
Prep school was 4 years, and high school was 4 years. Okay.
Correct. Also, just to reiterate what I said last week, Butler is in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which is where Pittsburgh is. And the sheriff of Allegheny County is Kevin Krause, and he went to LaRoche College, which is in Allegheny County. Now, it's not Catholic, or it's not Jesuit, but it's Catholic. So close enough.
Yeah, they run all the universities anyway, so it doesn't matter if the Jesuits own it. They're controlling.
Okay, so you had all. Now, something I mentioned before, this has been standard operating procedure for the Secret Service ever since they've been providing security for the president, or allegedly providing security for the president, is if they're in the United States, they'll coordinate with state and local law enforcement. So they had to work with the Pennsylvania State Police and with the Allegheny Sheriff's Department, because the Sheriff's Department provides policing services for the town of Butler. Now, Pittsburgh has its own police department. So forgive me for boring you with all those extraneous details. So just, I know something you've talked about several times is the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. So just as a quick reminder, you had Secret Service and the FBI involved on the national level. On the state level, you had the Rangers, the Texas State Rangers. On the local level, you have the Dallas County Sheriff's Department and the Dallas PD. So you're talking about at least 5 different entities involved.
Mm-hmm.
Because in theory, they want local people involved because they're more familiar with the terrain. Where are all the one-way streets? Where are all the potential hazards, things like that. But in reality, they want the local law enforcement involved because it's easy. If they want to kill the president or the candidate, it'd be easier to have their help. Now, in all fairness, with the Allegheny County Sheriff's Department or the Pennsylvania State Police, I'd imagine most of the Pennsylvania state troopers who were there were not involved. They're just simply following orders. They just need to control a few key people.
Yep, that's right. Yep, that's true.
Now, something we've discussed before, if you look at almost any event in history, say, particularly the last 100 years, whether you're talking about with the aborted assassination or the alleged aborted assassination of Donald Trump, or what happened in Israel last October, or 9/11, you have perceived incompetence. You have people who weren't doing their jobs, or they didn't know what they're doing, but actually that's done by design.
That's right, my George. Absolutely done by design.
Okay, because they want to maximize the most number of casualties. Now,
that's right. That's why the war between the states, Lincoln and with the Tsar of Russia blockaded the East Coast so that the medicines could not get delivered to the South to heal wounds, which is a violation of a law of war. It's a violation of Libre Code, I also believe. So by making every wound fatal. So that's why they cut off all the supplies. A savage thing to do for Yankee North to the South.
Yes. Now, speaking of Huguenots, we just talked about this Army general, Herbert Dargue, Dargue. Over the weekend, there was a South African-born actress by the name of Esther Kerblanche. So she's 51 years old, and her cause of death is unknown. She was white, and she was of Huguenot descent. I guess a huge number of Huguenots ended up going into Southern Africa, in the country that would ultimately become South Africa. And I guess
try to stay close to your mic, George. Okay, please.
Okay. So Esther was, I guess, a soap opera star in South Africa, and she moved to the United States for a while, and she was on General Hospital or one of those shows. And so she died over the weekend at the age of 51 of some unknown cause. I'm not going to speculate what she died of, but yeah, what a tragedy.
It is a terrible tragedy. A beautiful woman at that young age, with all of her experience and abilities, and probably killed by some medication or something that she ate, or something that was completely avoidable. It's pitiful.
Well, yes, and she's fairly erudite. I mean, she knew several languages. In addition to her native Afrikaans, she knew English, obviously. She knew Dutch. She knew, it's not really a stretch, German, Italian, French. So she probably spoke something like 7 or 8 different languages.
She was a trophy. She was a trophy white woman with all these abilities, a builder of culture, probably mother, having children. Exactly what you want to have if you want to build a new white Protestant and Baptist nation. Well, we can't have that. So we just kill them off piecemeal. Yep.
Just like this general, 80 plus years ago, this Dargue. Now, as I said, he did have children, grandchildren, things like that. But you want to kill off the best of your manhood to make sure that you get rid of them. Anybody who might oppose the machine, you need to eliminate him.
That's right. Well, that's why we have the CIA and the mafia. And the FBI just cleans things up. So all the three-letter agencies are here to keep the commander-in-chief in power with his emergency war powers military government since March 9th, 1933. And that's why all the three-letter agencies exist, to secure the hold of their success, of the crown of their success. It's right in the tremendous military government martial law by Berkheimer. He even has that in there. But go ahead.
Okay. So we spoke a couple times about this passage, Thomas Matthew Crooks, who is only 20 years old. And now I'm not sure how they groomed him, but the FBI must have had their eyes on him for a while. And now he was actually from Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, which is, I guess, a suburb of Pittsburgh. And hitherto, I'm sorry.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, you're going to say something.
Well, yeah, I was just agreeing with you, George. It was a suburb of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Bethel Park, as I said, is a suburb of Pittsburgh. And hitherto, it's caused a lot of... Well, here's a little fact about it. I just found out recently that the first armored truck robbery took place in Bethel Park back in 1929, March the 11th.
Mm-hmm. The first robbery took place there? Is that what you said?
Armored truck robbery.
Oh, armored truck robbery. Uh-huh.
And
well, that's interesting because that was getting along. Well, the New Deal hadn't been interposed yet, so but the Great Depression was about to come on them in October of 29. So was this armored truck robbery before October of 29?
March 11th. So you're talking
okay.
7-8 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So the ringleader of this armed robbery, this is no joke, and my imagination is not that good. His name was Paul
what?
Paul Jaworski. Jarwocik. He was born in he was actually born in the Russian Empire. So he was born in Poland, or what would become Poland, and he grew up devout Roman Catholic, and he was an altar boy. But by the time he was a teenager, he said he lost his faith.
Well, good. That's the only practical outcome of Catholicism anyway, to become an atheist, communist atheist. And that's why all your historic Catholic nations are that. That's why France is socialist communist. The Jesuits ruined France, and so the French said, if this is Christianity, we don't want anything part of it. And so there's only 3% of the people go to church in France today. They've completely paganized it through the outrages of the Jesuits for the last 300 years.
Well, speaking of France, once again, I guess the two fastest growing religious movements in France, and I suppose you can say this is true the rest of Europe, is atheism and Islam. And yes, atheism is a religious movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's all about creating the new right. Solzhenitsyn said in his Gulag work, he said it should be illegal to be an atheist. Because of what they did in Russia, you have no right to be atheist in any country. And he essentially said that in his Gulag Archipelago, in Volume 1, first one.
Well, he wasn't a contemporary, but Tolstoy said the Jesuits don't even believe in God.
Well, of course not. At the top, though, they do. When they have their black masses, and the demons manifest themselves, they do. But the lower Jesuits are not invited to the black masses. They're, for the most part, a bunch of atheists, like Teilhard de Chardin and a host of others.
Okay, so regarding what just happened, I guess about 10 days ago in Butler. So as I said, you had the alleged shooter, Crooks, was from Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. And prior to this whole episode, the biggest thing that happened in Bevel Park was this armored truck robbery. And so Yurkowski was involved with other robberies, and he ended up going to the electric chair in 1929 at the age of 29. And so he actually had a priest go to him and said, "Hey, son, would you like me to take your confession?" He said, "No, Father, I'm not going to die a coward."
Yeah. Yep, not going to die a coward.
And he said, because the rationale was, well, you have a bunch of people who grew up Catholic, and just prior to their deaths, they discover God, and they go to a priest, and they go to him for their confession. But he said, Yurkowski said, "Nope, not going to do that." So,
Yeah. That's great. Mm-hmm. So we'll further degenerate into the culture, and nobody has any absolutes that they can hold on to, because the Bible is irrelevant. The Bible is just a book. The Bible is just a bunch of fairy tales. We got Adam and Eve, and what a bunch of fairy tales. So that's what they've successfully put on the American culture, and so that's why it acts as demoralized and degenerate as it does today. The wicked have done abominable iniquity. And part of being wicked is denying creation and that God created this out of nothing. Romans chapter 1, for God has shown it to them. And so they're willingly ignorant of creation and the flood.
Well, just going back to that alleged John Lennon song. Now, who wrote it, I don't know, but it's almost certainly it wasn't John Lennon. But if you just go to the lyrics, he said, imagine there's no borders, imagine there's no God, no heaven above, no hell below, nothing to kill for, nothing to die for, no greed, no hunger. And some of the ideas are laudable, but others not so much. Because what is the point, what is the point of imagining this? Well, if you think of something,
so we can sin, so we can enjoy sin and get naked and get in a black bag with my Japanese concubine and fornicate, which is what John Lennon did. Go ahead.
Well, he did actually marry her.
Oh, he did that. What now?
Well, John did actually end up marrying Yoko.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't particularly faithful.
Okay, well.
But
another notorious fornicator along with her. And because we don't want to be accountable for anything like that, why, there cannot be a God. Just imagine that. So since there's no God, we don't have to feel ashamed when we're all fornicating and copulating and committing adultery. And what else?
And of course, imagine there's no countries. Geez.
There we go. No country, that all these savages can come in your country and take everything you ever worked for. I mean, no country means no protection of property. No country means no private property. If there's no private property, what are you working for? Huh? Go ahead, George.
One of the lines I don't have in front of me is imagine no possessions. That means
imagine no private property. Imagine working for the good of the whole, from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. Oh, goody, we can live happily ever after and never have one production of wealth or no new idea or no invention. It's just, what are you going to do when the farmers don't start planting food? You can't lay around and copulate and commit sin when you don't have anything to eat. Someone's got to do some work. Go ahead, George.
Well, yes, indeed. And, so the whole idea, I realized that right after the event in Butler, you were entertaining the possibility that it could have been a legitimate shooting. But I get the impression that you may have changed your position on that.
Yeah, I have. On my recent broadcast that people can listen to, 24/7 World Radio, go archive programs, and go on down to EJP Hour 2 with preaching and teaching. And it's the last one down there, and I'm utterly convinced that Trump was never shot. It was a fake. And he is the most outrageous, individual alive right now in this country for putting on this act that he was shot, and then looking the crowd in the eye after while he's speaking. I'm never going to tell this story again. I don't want to bring it up again. And he talks about how there was blood on his hand. It was just covered with blood. There was no blood on his right hand. There was no blood on his right hand when he raised it up in a clenched fist. It's like the great Mount Suribachi moment where they're putting up the flag and you got Trump there with his fist up and the two white Secret Service agents with their sunglasses on. This is Mount Suribachi. Iwo Jima. We're going to win. We're going to fight. That wicked sinner. What a disgrace. Anyway, I won't get off on that. This is your broadcast, George.
Well, no. Well, I mean, this is. Well, I'm a guest on your program, and so if you want to interject, please do so. Now, I've seen a number of interviews with people who are in the Secret Service and retired for special forces like Army, Rangers, SEALs, and the consensus is that's not how you behave if you've actually been shot. For a number of reasons. In the Secret Service, the person whom they're protecting is called the principal, in this case, Donald Trump. And your number one priority is to secure him, make sure that he's out of harm's way. Because the Secret Service agents are around him, I'm not sure if they're read in, but they have no way of knowing that there was at least a second or a third shooter. So that would have been incredibly irresponsible of him to stand up and do the communist fist punch. Was it? Do you remember the 1960s?
Brother George, Trump knew all about it. He'd been briefed. He'd been told to drop when the shot goes out and, oh, blood on my hand, lift it up and look at it now, and then it's going to go down. He's been all briefed. And the big Secret Service agent from the white guy from his left jumps on him, and I'm sure he probably put a little blood in his ear and scratched a little bit. Okay, Donald, we got it on there now. And put your head down a little bit. Make sure it runs down your cheek now. It's just so absolutely outrageous to sell that to the American people. And you got the whole press behind you to sell it to them. And tell me, if you were in the Secret Service, wouldn't you be checking out every high position like the water tower? Huh? Wouldn't you be checking that out to see if somebody was there? And obviously there was somebody there. He was a Secret Service agent. It's just the whole thing stinks to high heaven. Easily proven it was a false assassination attempt, even though the bastards killed at least one innocent man, a fireman in the crowd. But that gives it more credibility. That's really an assassination attempt. So they don't care if they kill a few people. That's what these sinners think of us.
Okay. Also, they probably, if this were a legitimate attack, they want to get him off the stage as quickly as possible. Also, inexplicably, he took his shoes off. I heard that could have been a Masonic thing.
Maybe. Yeah, he says, I got to get my shoes. Did you hear that?
Yeah. No, we can send somebody back later to get your shoes. We need to get you off the stage now. And so this poor little schmuck, crook, he was probably sacrificed, groomed online or something, and he was expendable, disposable. And
of course he was. He had that commercial with BlackRock.
Yeah.
And BlackRock's run by a Jew, a Masonic Jew, so it's got to be the Jews. The Jews did it. Go ahead.
Okay. So he was just another Timothy McVeigh or Lee Harvey Oswald or Charles Joseph Whitman or almost an endless number of hats.
That's right.
So
James Earl Ray. Yeah, there we go. And they all have three names: James Earl Ray, Lee Harvey Oswald. We got Crooks, just with his three names. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, Sirhan, Bashar, Sirhan. And so it's interesting. Now, Crooks, as far as I know, has no military background whatsoever. National Guard, whatever. Now, they don't always need somebody who has that background. He also doesn't have a university background. He attended a community college in Allegheny County, although maybe one of his instructors got to him that way, although I haven't looked at it. So we know that Ted Kaczynski, the so-called Unabomber, he was a student of Timothy Leary and Ramdas, aka Richard Alpert.
You mean CIA, LSD, Timothy Leary? Is that the one you're talking about?
Holy Cross, Timothy Leary.
Holy Cross, Timothy Leary. Okay, he probably went to school with Chris Matthews. Maybe they were in the same class together.
Yes, and also Leary went to the West Point, but he left just before graduation and switched over to the Navy instead. Now, okay,
and the Jesuits have been in control of West Point for 100 years or more, because they have to train their officers of their military colossus to wage crusades for the benefit of the Pope. So naturally, we would have to be there teaching the officers.
Well, I mean, George Smith Patton, he went to West Point.
He went to West Point in a day when there was certain patriotism there, and it had not been totally corrupted as it has been after World War II.
Okay. And so, yeah, I don't mean to besmirch his name. But so
they killed Patton. They killed Patton, who was what? The grandson of Colonel Patton at Gettysburg?
Well, he was George Smith Patton III. He was the grandson of George Smith Patton the first.
Yeah. So they're going to kill George C. Patton III in World War II, just like they're going to kill Nathan Bedford Forrest III in World War II. We got to get rid of these sons of these white devils that fought so hard in the war. So, yeah, we're going to kill them off too.
Well, also Tom Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, the grandson of Stonewall Jackson, he was also killed in World War II. I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay, all right. You're baiting me, George, but that's okay. Go something else now. Just don't forget to get back to that.
Okay, we'll do. Okay, so, however, that reminds me. Do you know who Leonard Lake was?
Leonard who?
Lake, as in like the
Lake.
body of water.
No,
L-I-K-E. So he and Charles Ng were probably the two most prolific California-based killers ever. They, between them, murdered at least 25 people in the 1970s and 80s.
So they were serial killers?
Yes. However,
and by the way, for my listeners, I just want to stress the fact that serial killers are always white.
Generally speaking.
Rarely black. Yep.
Well, and I'm going to I'm going to talk about one exception. Okay, so why do I bring up Len Lake and Charlie Ng? Well, they were something like 15 years apart. Leonard Lake lived from the 29th of October 1945 died on June the 6th, D-Day, 1985. So he was 39 years old. His partner, Charles Ng, who was born in Hong Kong, was born on the 24th of December 1960. So he's about 15 years younger than Lake. So, and why do I bring them up? Well, besides that, both of them were in the United States Marine Corps. Lake actually had a fairly distinguished career in the Marines. He was in from 1964 to 1971, and he actually made it to sergeant. Now, he was a radar technician, like Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was stationed at Da Nang Base. Lake did 2 tours of Vietnam, and he received several accommodations. But turns out that he has some psychological problems, so they say. So, as I said, he was in the Marines for 7 years, from 1964 to 1971. And from all intents and purposes, he planned on making a career out of the Marines, which is hard to do as enlisted, because 85% of those who go of the enlisted only do one stint, usually 4 years. So, as I said, something happened to Lake. What exactly, I don't know. And he got out of the Marine in 1971. He received an honorable discharge. Now, you mind if I bore you with some other extraneous details about Lake?
No, it's important, George. I mean, if it's important enough to bring it on the broadcast, please do.
Okay, so he was born and raised in San Francisco. He was considered a bright child, but he developed a problem with pornography back in the 1950s. As I said, he was born in 1945. So this is the pre-internet era. So I guess he would sell newspapers and have lemonade stands, so he raised money to buy smuts, whatever was available, Playboy, or whatever was popular.
Is that CIA Playboy Hugh Hefner, the racial Jew? So we can blame the Jews for all the smut?
I think you're talking about I'm talking about the other Hugh Hefner. So anyhow, so he didn't like school. So I guess in 1964 he joined the Marines, and as I said, he served from 64 to 71, and he did 2 tours in Vietnam. So he left the Marines in 1971, and for the remainder of his life, he did odd jobs. He was a handyman, he did deliveries, but I'm not sure how exactly he really supported himself. So he went from being a Marine to being very anti-Marine. He grew his hair out, grew out a long beard, developed, the bohemian hippie lifestyle. So, do I have any proof of this? No. I can speculate. Do you mind if I speculate?
Speculation is always a part of solving a problem and eliminating the non-essentials to the equation. So yes, go ahead, speculate, George.
Okay, he was probably almost certainly subjected to MK Ultra or something like that. He was probably involved with Operation Phoenix, and he spent the remainder of his life as an asset. He was on the CIA.
Tell the listeners about Operation Phoenix, George. I mean, tell us what happened on that one.
Well, okay, what little I know about it, it was the brainchild of William Colby.
And who was William Colby?
Well, he was, I forgot his dates, but at one time he was a director of the CIA. He testified from the church committee. The church committee in the mid-90s.
He's a Knight of Malta also. So he's busy serving the Pope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we talked about Phoenix before. Allegedly, if you go to Wikipedia, if you go to Wikipedia, they'll say it was a CIA operation that took place in the 1960s and 70s in Southeast Asia, mostly what was in South Vietnam, in which U.S. forces went into villages and basically kidnapped undesirables, whatever that meant. Intellectuals, dissenters.
Anybody that makes a country.
Yeah.
Anybody that can run a country for the benefit of the people. Yeah.
Yes. So according to Wikipedia, and I use that advisedly, they kidnapped roughly 80,000 people and killed roughly a third or maybe half, 25,000, maybe 40,000.
I heard 40. I think Fletcher Prouty in his book JFK, when he talked about Phoenix, he said it was 40,000.
Okay, although the number was probably at least well over 100,000.
You figure they killed nearly 5 million Vietnamese in that war.
Yeah. So almost all of them were women and children or elderly people. Or
real threats there. You might get shot by them. Even real threat here now.
Okay, so as I said, Lake was probably involved with Phoenix. I don't have proof of that. Was almost exposed to MK Ultra. I don't have proof of that. I can only speculate. But when he came back, when he came back to the United States, he was a monster. And I say that because he had no visible means of support during, making a few bucks here and there, working as a handyman or doing gardening or things like that. And he bounced all over from place to place. He lived in San Jose for a while. He went to college there, but dropped out after less than a year. So the two places where Lake and Ng did the bulk of their killings were Calaveras County, which is north of Sacramento, and Mendocino County, which is a couple hours north of San Francisco.
And how many people did Lake kill?
Well, at least 25.
25.
So what they would do is they kidnap usually young women. Occasionally, the
George, your cheering section's calling you.
Okay. So anyhow, it was at least 25 victims. So they would kidnap them, mostly young women, videotape them with whatever recording devices they had back then, and essentially make sub-films. And they,
when I first heard of that, George, when I was in the station in Germany, back from 72 to 77, one of the guys in the shop told me about that. His name was Tim Talbert. He was from Virginia. I said, Tim, there's no such thing. He said, oh, yes, there is. And that's when I awoke to that horrible reality. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so why am I bringing them up in the context of what we normally discuss? Well, Ing was born in Hong Kong, and his parents lived all over the world. They lived in England, various places in Europe, the United States. But I guess in the late 70s, he came to the United States and joined the Marine Corps. But before he went to the Marines, he went to Notre Dame High School in Belmont, California, which is just south of San Francisco. So he went to a Catholic high school. And
so we can worship the Virgin Mary. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, okay. So later on, Ing joined Lake. So they both had been in the Marine Corps. So they both had a military background. And they both were probably working for the CIA. Because they're again, Ing, just like Lake, after he left the Marine Corps, had no visible means of support. Just like
that's the same story. It's the same story with John Wilkes Booth. After he escaped Washington, he went to India, he came back, and he lived in Oklahoma where he died in Enid, Oklahoma. And the people there said he always had money and he had no visible means of support. Because the Knights of the Golden Circle, which the Jesuits ran, were busy giving him money for shooting Lincoln. But that's the intelligence community or the government is busy funding these assassins and these mass murderers.
Okay, so you may be wondering why. Why would they use somebody like? Well, so anyhow, so I said Lake died on June the 6th, 1985, when he got pulled over on a routine traffic stop in San Francisco, and I guess he had expired registration. It was a relatively minor offense. And so the police were detaining him, and they asked, "Hey, could I have a glass of water?" And they said, "Sure." And so the cop who arrested him, stepped out, and I guess he took a cyanide capsule, and he died shortly thereafter. So that's when they found out about him, his background. So as I said, this took place in San Francisco, which is odd. And almost all of your serial killers and mass murderers are CIA, FBI creations, at least in the United States. And you could say over in England, they're MI5, MI6 creations.
Sure. Oh, sure. We have to inform our listener that these secret intelligence operations are not for our good. They're there to oppress the population of the country that these intelligence agencies supposedly defend. That's what they're really doing. They're not helping you. They're not protecting you from some foreign invaders. We got 40 million foreign invaders here. Did one agency ever protect us from that? They're there to afflict us. The FSB, SVR is there to afflict the Russian people. The FBI, CIA is there to afflict the American people. Same way for Britain. MI5, MI6, there to afflict the British people. Who do you think brought in all these savages to turn Liverpool into a Muslim savage rape fest against all these white women? It's the intelligence communities that do this. And they're run by the Knights. And the Knights are subject to the Pope. And as long as any people thinks that their government with their intelligence communities are on their side, they'll never get by this. It's going to keep happening. Go ahead, George.
I know this from several sources. The Hamas, which is supposed to be, I know there's no such thing as Palestinian, but okay, so let's just say this fictitious place called Palestine is real. and you have a real people called Palestinians. And Hamas is supposed to be fighting for them. Well, I know from several sources that it was the Mossad that created Hamas back in 1987.
It makes perfect sense. And Mossad is created by Reinhard Gehlen of the Nazi intelligence group, aided with the CIA of Alan Dulles, and we can read that in the book titled Secret War Against the Jews by John Loftus. So Mossad is an enemy of the Jewish people, like Shin Bet, the domestic Mossad. The Shin Bet is an enemy of the Jewish people. That's why Shin Bet killed Yitzhak Rabin. So they're assassins to take out political problems that would inhibit the Pope from running his province according to his wishes.
Okay, so would you say that Shin Bet would be analogous to our FBI?
Yes, absolutely. That's what Barry Chambers taught me. Barry Chambers,
okay.
the prolific author in Israel. I have several of his books.
Okay, so you have these monsters. Now, Charles Ng is still alive. He was given he got convicted in the 1990s, but he was given the death penalty, as if that means anything. He was just simply following. Okay, I'm not defending him, but he was just simply following orders. And I guess they decided to pull the plug on Little Lake because he probably knew too much. So that's why they had him kill himself. So,
sure. Remember, Angleton in his last interview with Joseph Trento, in the book Trento wrote about him, Angleton said, we killed thousands of people controlled by the CIA. We killed thousands of them with the CIA. And then he said, most of them deserved it. That's Angleton. That's the Kennedy assassin. Go ahead.
Okay, so I know I've covered this material before. We talked about MK Ultra, and that's somewhat of a dated term. That goes back to 1950. So you're talking 55, 70 years ago. So, and it never ended. They may have changed the name and they may have modified it and may have become more advanced and sophisticated with technology. But MK Ultra, or that spirit, has never disappeared. Officially, it existed from 1953 to 1970. So,
and remember, George, MK Ultra was transplanted here by the Nazis that the Jesuits controlled, like Mengele and others.
Okay.
It's just a continuation of the Nazi SS Third Reich, run by the Jesuits.
So I've said this before, so forgive me for repeating myself. But before you had MK Ultra, you had Operation Artichoke. Now, people have heard of MK Ultra, but virtually nobody has ever heard of Artichoke, which was basically the Matrix, served as the Matrix for MK Ultra. Now, the engineer for that, for Artichoke, was Paul Francis Gaynor, who got his undergrad degree from Scranton University. So his dates were 1914 to 1975, and he was a colonel in the U.S. Army. And I said this before. So Artichoke was basically your worst nightmare. Literally, it dealt with hypnosis, drugging, psychosis, sleep deprivation, disorientation, putting people in, burning people, literally desensitizing people to where they can put their hands in a flame and they wouldn't pull it out.
That's what G. Gordon Liddy was noted for. Putting a flame under his hand and leaving it there. Then it would turn black and he could take that pain because he was a good Jesuit educated coadjutor.
Okay, well, see, almost all the participants were involved. There were Army, Navy, various services, and it was just simply not because they had misbehaved. They could have been excellent soldiers. So it's just simply it was the luck of the draw, so to speak, and they were subjected to this. The Nazis, in their worst days, could not have come up with this.
Nazism was kindergarten. They went to high school and college when it came over here.
Okay, so they expanded the program in 1953 and they renamed it MK Ultra. And so they passed the baton. So Gaynor, who I said was trained by the Jesuits at Stanford University, he decided to hand it off to Dr. Sidney Gottlieb.
Sidney Gottlieb, that sinner. Yeah. Yeah, that evil, wicked sinner.
Now, I'm not sure
By
how.
the way, the lady that has spoken out the most on MK Ultra is Kathy O'Brien. And for you listeners who've never heard of her, you need to get her book, National, what is it? Transformation of America. And what's the other one, George?
Well, I believe, you just mentioned transformation.
Yeah, Transformation of America, and what is it? National Security. One on the national security state. But anyway, Kathy O'Brien has probably done the most exposure of MK Ultra than anybody. So your listeners need to be familiar with her. Kathy O'Brien. Go ahead, George.
Well, one of the sub-projects.
Access Denied. That's the book. Access Denied for Reasons of National Security by Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Brien. You got to have the book.
Okay. Well, one of the other sub-projects that fell under the rubric of MK Ultra was Operation Midnight Climax. Now, most people had never heard of that. Had you?
Midnight Climax? What? That sounds like something sexual. It probably is, wicked perverts, but go ahead.
Okay, so this was operated in the 1960s out of Fort Mason, San Francisco, more commonly called the Presidio. So, yes, you're right.
Presidio, is that the Presidio of that Aquino sinner, Colonel Aquino, who was friends with Anton LaVey and his Church of Satan?
Yes. So what they did, this took place in the 1960s. So what they do is the CIA would hire prostitutes and pay them like 2 or 3 times the normal rate to basically entrap officers or army officers at the Presidio and say, hey, you don't want your wife to find out about this or whatever. So you'll do whatever it is we tell you to do. So I said this is 1960, so you're talking Vietnam era. So
yeah, they call that a honeypot.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so
some good Catholic thought of that. Go ahead.
Okay. So we only know a fraction of what the CIA has done in the last 75 plus years or 80 years. If you go back, to the OSS, all the projects and operations in which they're involved. In terms of, you mentioned pornography, specifically Playboy and Hugh Hefner. Yes, he was on the CIA payroll his entire career.
He was on the CIA payroll for the entire career. Why, does that mean the Jews run everything, George? Do they run the CIA? Yeah, remember this anti-Jew bashing is getting worse and worse, so we have to address that too from time to time. Go ahead.
Okay, so just like Jon Stewart.
Jon Stewart.
He's a comedian, talk show host. Who was born John Stewart Leibowitz.
I'm not familiar with him.
Okay, did you catch his name? John Stewart Leibowitz?
Oh, Leibowitz? Is that what you said? Leibowitz?
Yes. Now, he's like a
sounds Jewish to me. Yeah, go ahead.
But his wife is Catholic.
Well, they always have that combination. They got to have a Jew that's there for the brains and the Catholics that's there for the daring. So you combine those two and you got a daring, brainy individual and perfect stooge for the Jesuit order.
So they'll tell him whatever, so he'll tell whatever joke or talk about whatever thing and to serve the agenda. And speaking of jokes and speaking of comedians, I'm sure you caught over the weekend that Bob Newhart died.
I had heard that. I know that my mother used to watch Bob Newhart's show. She loved him, thought he was hilarious. One thing about him, though, I think he was clean. He was never sexually a pervert, and I think his jokes were generally clean. I think.
Okay, so he served. You had the Hegelian dialect. you had the so-called clean comedians like Bob Newhart and Bill Cosby, and you had the dirty ones like George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, and so forth. And so you can have your pick. You can have the Prince Hall Freemason Bill Cosby, who was clean, and then you had Bob Newhart, George Roberts Newhart, born the 5th of September 1929, died, I guess, the 20th on July the 20th. So he was 94 years old. So why do I bring him up? Well, he got his undergrad degree from Loyola Chicago. He went to St. Ignatius Prep, and he also went to a Catholic school prior to that. So he was
they had him good in sheep dip to put him wherever they wanted him.
Yes. Also, he was in the U.S. Army back in the early 1950s during the Korean War. And
so
I know this.
He was an officer then? Was he an officer?
He was enlisted. He was like a typist or something, or so they say. So you could say he was the good cop comedian, and that was his role for over 60 years. Now, before he got in comedy, he was an accountant. As a matter of fact, his degree was in accounting. So what did he do in his career? Back in the day, comedians did comedy albums. I know, all your big names, like the aforementioned George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory, they had albums, which you listen to on vinyl. Now, I know this technology is a little bit dated, but he later went on to star in the Bob Newhart Show, which ran from 1972 to 78, and he later was in the Newhart Show, which ran from 1982 to 1990. So between these two shows, he was on the air for 14 years, which is a fairly successful television career. Yes.
And what network was he with? CBS?
I guess that would seem most likely.
He was with the Catholic Broadcasting System, right?
Yes. So, as I said, he played the Hegelian dialectic. He talked about problems they have, not being able to communicate with your wife, or having problems with customer service, or things that most people can relate to. And so, as I said, his material was not intrinsically wicked. But if you think about it, what is the job of a comedian? Is to distract you, is to pacify you, is to control you. Now, granted, with other comedians, such as Richard Pryor, it was good to get you to laugh at sin.
Get you to laugh at sin. That's exactly right. And then once you start laughing at sin, then you're going to participate in it. That's really nice now. Then bringing the national judgment of God on the place.
Yes. So
with his four sore judgments of a military dictator, war, disease, and famine. Those are his four sore judgments. All results of the sin of the people. Go ahead.
Well, okay. And I know we've been going. So have we? I've lost track of. We're getting close to the end of time. But something I noticed is a difference between entertainers of the past and from now. When I say the past, I'm talking about from, say, the 1940s until the 1970s. It seems as if the majority of them had a military background. They're in some sort of branch of service. And you're talking, for the most part, the post-World War II crowd. And
the post-World War II crowd, because you remember, they were suckers. They thought we were fighting to save the world from Hitler. I remember my father said that to me. So fighting to save the world. There's more of us killed in one GD day than in the entire Vietnam War when we were fighting to save the world from Hitler. I said, you really believe that, Dad? The greatest generation was the greatest sucker generation of America ever had. And they raised a bunch of suckers called the baby boomers, of which I'm a member of that. But go ahead.
Okay, so something I've noticed is about the majority of the entertainers from, say, the 1950s up until the 1970s. Those are in movies and television. The majority of them had a military background. James Garner, his Korean War.
Steve McQueen was in the Marines, and
Yeah, but the reason, George, is because that the people think he's wonderful. I mean, he was in the military and he was protecting us, and he's a wonderful actor. He was in the military. Instead of saying he was an outright sucker to be a member of this Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire crusading army, and that no one would ever brag about that. Go ahead, George.
Okay. So I bring up this point, but it basically, whether you're wearing a uniform, I mean, you're going on the beaches of Omaha or Quezon or where you're fighting, South Korea. Once you become a civilian and you become an actor, director, comedian, whatever, you're still a soldier. You're a soldier in civilian clothing. You're a soldier for the Pope, even though you may not be.
You're a soldier for the Pope and the theater, in the Jesuit theater. Why, sure.
Okay. So whether you're getting people to laugh at sin or not, or something that sounds sinful, or you're getting them to think that you're a great war hero or you're a cowboy or whatever, that is how they use you. Now, that also increases the likelihood of you having an intelligence background and you being an asset.
Because he can keep a secret. He can keep a secret, so he can keep more secrets when he's busy working for Hollywood or whatever.
Okay, so if you think about it, somebody who was in the news recently, Clint Eastwood's wife or girlfriend who was like more than 30 years his junior just died under suspicious circumstances. And her name was Christina Sandra or something.
So Clint Eastwood is still alive and his girlfriend just died, right?
Yeah. And she was like 30 years his junior, or more than 30, or 33 years his junior. And I realize that age difference is coincidental. So I don't know. Okay, I don't know what she died of. Could have been the Pope. Who knows? But if you look at Clint Eastwood, I liked him growing up. I loved his movies. Like
I did too.
Okay,
I did too. Yeah. Uh-huh. Love Dirty Harry Callahan. My grandfather's name. Yeah. He's
okay.
And the movie Play Misty, for me, that was a real interesting movie. Shows you can't be fornicating around and not suffer for it, but he put some good things out there.
Okay, but if you think about it, everything Clint Eastwood has done, going back to 1950, he's been a complete asset. He has somehow served the machine somehow.
Yes. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Whether it was as in the the No Man, the spaghetti western movie, his characters are incredibly Jesuitical. They engage in ethical
mental reservation.
Well, yes, situational ethics.
Situational ethics is tied to mental reservation. That's right. And probabilism. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so if you even look at the whole Dirty Harry franchise, he's a good guy. He is a symbol of law and order. But is he really that good? Is he that much better than the bad guys, his opponents? Well,
no, because they're justifying vengeance and taking the law into their own hands when the law doesn't exist. So that's what Harry did.
Oh, okay. So let's just talk specifically about the movie Dirty Harry, which came out in 1971. Now, interestingly enough, in the original imagination of Harry Fink, it wasn't supposed to be anything that you saw in that film. First, it's supposed to be set in New York City. Also, Clint Eastwood was, I believe, the fourth or fifth actor to actually be offered the part. They originally offered it to Frank Sinatra, and he said no. Then to John Wayne, he said no. Then Paul Newman, he said no. Steve McQueen, then to Paul Newman, then Clint Eastwood. Now,
so Clint Eastwood then got the part for Dirty Harry.
Yes. Now, he made a couple of requests that they made a couple. Now, it was supposed to be set in New York City originally, but he wanted it set in his hometown of San Francisco. And he also asked that Don Siegel direct him, whom he worked with in several other films like oh, Paint Your Wagon. He done like 4 or 5 films with Don Siegel. And originally, the bad guy, Scorpio, was supposed to be played by none other than Audie Murphy, but he had his little accident, so he wasn't available.
Mm-hmm.
So the part went to a relatively unknown Andrew Robinson. But in the original idea, Scorpio is a psychotic Vietnam vet who has a falling out with the VA because they wouldn't pay him his benefits. And he said, well, you know what? Since you don't think I'm crazy, I'm going to show you how crazy I am. So his first victim is the daughter of the psychiatrist who said he wasn't crazy. And so all of his victims are targeted individuals. Now, I realize it's wicked, but they said, no, the film is too political. We don't want to get into the whole Vietnam angle, so we'll just cut that out.
Well, definitely, we don't want to be anti-Vietnam, that's for sure, because we got John Wayne there with the Green Beret and parading himself around as a great hero and freeing the poor little Vietnamese people. But go ahead, George.
Okay, but the movie was semi-political because they called the bad guy Scorpio, which was a nod to the Zodiac Killer, which was just taking place in the late 1960s. And I can elaborate as to why that was a complete CIA operation later on. I don't have time. But anyhow,
was that with David Berkowitz you're talking about?
Oh, that was Son of Sam. That would be later on in the 70s.
Okay, yeah. By the way, Vlad sent me a tremendous email telling me the truth about Berkowitz. So one broadcast we need to deal with him. But go ahead.
So anyhow, you could say the movie Dirty Harry was a backlash to the Earl Warren course, because you're in the scene where the DA is talking to Harry, and he said, well, I'm sorry, after he caught the killer, he said, I'm sorry, I can't prosecute him. And Harry says, well, why is that? Well, I'm not going to bring forth a case I can't possibly win, because you violated a whole bunch of his rights under the 4th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 5th Amendment, you name it. And they said, well, I'm all broken up over the man's rights. So, so that's why the DA decided not to prosecute the case against Scorpio. And so you could say that Harry would represent the right-wing backlash against.
Yes, that's exactly what it represents. I was part of it before I finally woke up. All the older white men that I was raised by and that I lived around, they were all the new right. Sick and tired of this communism and the civil rights movement. All of them were veterans. Yeah. Just took the Jesuits, 70 years to bring the new right to power. Go ahead.
Okay. So, just going full circle. I wish I could be more specific. So I started out at the beginning of the broadcast saying that there have been a number of Australian young women who've been kidnapped and gang raped in France. So are the French doing this on purpose?
Yeah, the French government brought those black bastards into France to mulattoize and mongrelize the white people of France even further, while at the same time knowing there will be an outrage to this so that the Jesuits can ignite their new right in France. So they win by mulattoizing and bastardizing the great white French race. They win by establishing a Roman Catholic new right. They win by rounding up all these black Muslims and these black savages that belong in Africa or the Middle East somewhere where they can do that to each other, or where they have governments that get killed for doing that stuff, because that's the only kind of government they can live under. And then, in the end, have the new right all across Europe to purge it of its Jews finally and drive the best ones to Israel in preparation for the 70th week of Daniel. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, as I said, I heard about this from the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Network. They're talking about what appears to be this alarming trend of Australian women being kidnapped in France, when they go there to visit or whatever. So you'd have to imagine the Australian government is in on this as well.
Of course. Of course. The Australian government is run by the Archbishop there in Sydney. It's a papal empire where the princes of the church control the capitals of the world through their archbishops and bishops of the major cities, and they in turn directing the banking and the intelligence community, and the whole system is overseen by the Jesuit order to keep it on track. That's all there is.
Okay,
the last thing they want, George, is some group of men that would say, we've had enough of this, and we are now going to start to do something about it. And there's going to be a fear of these savages that when they want to rape a white woman, that they're going to know that they're going to be rounded up and dealt with. And that will be the only thing they understand. They have no respect for the police, for the law, for the prisons. The prisons are nothing more than gladiator societies. There's no punishment there. So the only thing they would really fear is a bunch of white men getting armed and making night rides to arrest these bastards and take them out and deal with them, shoot them, or whatever needs to be done with them. And then when that starts happening, they're just going to stop doing that. That's exactly what the Russians do. If any Russian woman is captured by these savage blacks or Muslims or whatever, and they rape her, the Russian men take vengeance. And I applaud them for it, because the law is not there to punish these savages. So therefore, they have to be punished. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so, but if you think about it, this is going to be if this continues or even exacerbates, this is going to have huge negative repercussions for not just France, but for all of Europe, because people from places like Australia or wherever, or America, won't want to go there and spend their dollars or euros or whatever. And it's going to hurt them economically, because people don't want to, well, gee, do I want to go over to France and see the Louvre or the Eiffel Tower or the Champs-Elysees or whatever? No, because you have all these savages that are roaming the streets there.
I went to France one time when I was stationed in Germany. The GIs can take a bus and they take you over there, and you can spend like a week, and you're in hotels, and they take you to all the major places. I went to Paris, and when we were down in the major square there where the Eiffel Tower was, generally where all those buildings are, these guys came up to us and they had pornography in cards. And they were slapping their cards and wanted to know if we want some of that pornography. And I was with two black brethren in Christ, Brother Steve and Brother Chuck, and we were in a McDonald's, and this guy comes in with his good-looking sister, whatever, and wants to prostitute her to us. And Brother Steve is blacker than the ace of spades. He was absolutely African in his appearance. He was a Baptist. His father was a minister. And he spoke right up and he said, "We are Christian men. We don't do those things. And now you can leave." And the guy left. I said, "Good for you, Brother Steve." Yeah. So that was the last time I went to Paris. I never wanted to go back. I got sick of the place. I would never want to go back to that place.
Well, you mentioned something sad. You said you went to McDonald's in Paris, which is like one of the things the French pride themselves on. Several things is their food, their cuisine. Why do they need this American garbage over there?
Because that way it sells. It sells, and so when all the tourists come, they want to go to McDonald's, to Roman Catholic McDonald's. So yeah. So anyway, so I learned my lesson, man. I never want to go back there.
Oh, okay. Well, I probably won't go there. Not saying I wouldn't, but I know that 2-3 years ago it would have been impossible because you had to be poked to go on a plane. I'm not sure those rules are still in effect.
Yeah. And another thing, when I was in Paris there, we were on the bus, and Brother Steve was sitting in front of me, and the woman that was the host of the bus and taking us to the tour of Paris, she said, "And now we're coming to Pig Alley." I say, Pig Alley? And I looked out of the window, and every sexual thing that you could imagine was in lights. In lights. And I was aghast. And Steve turned around and he looked at me and says, "Brother Eric, put your head down. We don't have any business looking at those things." And he was right, and I did. Yeah. Anyway, so that was my Paris experience. Go ahead, brother. Oh, one more experience. Experience is they don't eat breakfast. They have a little muffin and a little jam and a little piece of butter. And I thought, is this breakfast? They expect us to live on this? Call it continental breakfast? All right, go ahead, George. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, this is back in the 1970s.
Right.
Just imagine how much worse things have got since then.
I can't
It's
imagine.
probably like 10 times worse,
Uh-huh.
100 times worse. And so it's just like, they have hundreds of thousands of these, savages living in places like Paris and Marseille and Lyon and so forth, who don't speak French. They have no intention of learning French and learning their customs or anything like that. They just want to move in and take over. Just like
here, just like England, just like all the other reconstructed white Protestant nations. Just move them in, take them over, take over the vote, push out the white people. And the Jesuits win either way. If the whites are disfranchised, they're no longer a power against the order. And if they are mobilized in a new right, they're a power for but they're also a power for the order if they're moved to the new right. So either way, the white race loses unless they decide to declare their independence and denounce the Jesuits and the secret societies for doing this to them. And they're not going to do that because the preachers aren't going to lead them. If the preacher's not going to lead them, it's not going to happen.
Well, and I know we've talked about this before, but I do have some material I wanted to cover, but I guess I'll have to hold on until next time. But one of the places where jazz became popular outside the U.S. was Paris. There are a few spots in like Berlin, your major cities in Europe, Paris, London, Berlin, and this is back in the 1920s. So you're talking almost 100 years ago.
In black jazz, the black music called jazz, right?
Well, yes. It's funny. I know we were talking about the Beatles earlier. So their engineer, George Martin, later Sir George Martin, ironically enough, said in interviews he hated rock and roll, and he didn't really care for the Beatles, but he had bills to pay. His background was classical because he had worked with Sir Thomas Beecham and.
Who is this, George?
This is George Martin, the engineer of the Beatles. He recorded their music, and he said one of the things he said is if Western civilization is an edifice, rock and roll is one of the sledgehammers they're going to use to destroy it.
That's right. And you know what, George? Nobody ever taught us white young men growing up what Western civilization was. We were never taught anything in school about that. We had no concept of our history, of our economic greatness, of our military boldness, of all the tremendous inventions and developments we pioneered. We were taught nothing. And so therefore, you know nothing. And when you see what's around you disintegrating, you don't know you're losing your culture. The most beautiful culture in world history, by the way, white, Protestant, and Baptist, Calvinistic cultures and countries. The most beautiful, the most advanced, the best food, not persecuting the Jews. I mean, we had it all. The Jesuits have taken it all. And the average white man knows nothing about it. All he knows about is the score of the football game or whatever.
Or who's in rehab, or who's getting divorced from whom, or who's the illegitimate child of whom. It's basically
as if that should make the news. That shouldn't even make the news. Who cares?
Well, I just was watching a video of Bill Cooper, and I've seen it before. And I guess he gave a talk on the New World Order and this talk was from the 1990s, so it was about 30 years old. And he said, he didn't exactly say who they are, but he said the powers that should be, and we know who they are, have got us preoccupied with the inane and mundane. You may know how many home runs the third baseman of your favorite baseball team hit last year, how much money he had, and how many illegitimate children he has. But do you know who's on your city council? Do you know who your mayor is?
Do you know who's taxing you to death to finance all those communists and brainwash your poor little children and teach them to masturbate when they go to public school? You know who did this? I tell you what, those days that the men that were raising me, if they'd have pulled any of that in public schools, they'd have went down and they would have lynched those teachers. That's right.
Yeah, and I remember back when I was going to school, we only had two sexes. So we obviously were less enlightened back then. But now,
they're vicious. These feminazis are vicious, and these sex changers are vicious. There's not a one humble bone in their body. And you're going to do what I like. You're going to accept me, or I'm going to hate your guts and want to kill you. Well, if that's where you want to go, then I guess we'll have to go there. But you have to not tolerate them.
Well, yes.
They're criminals. They're criminals. That's why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a criminal city, and their sin had been seen up to heaven, where the Lord came down with his two angels, and he never went into Sodom, but the two angels did, and they destroyed the place. And that's what's coming here, a destruction of this place. If we continue to countenance all this homosexuality, sex change trash, if we continue to countenance that and not say anything about it and refuse to finance, if we do not resist this, we're going to get the same kind of fire Sodom got. Might be an atomic detonation, but it's fire, and we will deserve it.
Okay, if I could just mention one last thing before we sign off. Back in 2020 and 2021, during this whole Corona hoax nonsense, or con job 1984, whatever you want to call it, there's an article that appeared in a local paper. This is back in November of 2020. It was about a local pizzeria that was not in compliance with the health orders. Back then, the rule was if you could have outdoor dining, but you had to have 3 openings. This pizzeria only had 2 openings. I kid you not. This was actually
to what? What did you? I couldn't understand you. To what?
Okay, this pizzeria, they could only have outdoor dining, and so they had a tent so people could eat outside.
They had a tent. Okay, thank you.
So people could eat inside the tent. Well, the rule was...
Slow down, George. Just speak slower and clearer, okay, please?
All right. So back in November 2020, I guess the county health department had a rule. They said that restaurants could operate outside, but they could have a tent because of the inclement weather, the rain or the cold or whatever they were dealing with. And however, the tent had to have 3 openings in it, so people can get in and out and so forth. But there's a local restaurant, pizzeria, that they had the tent, but it only had 2 openings instead of 3. Now, I know this may sound pedantic, and yes, it was. So the county code enforcer, or actually the city code enforcer, came in and fined this business $1,000 for not being in compliance with the order. So did you catch that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So what you have to have is a ministry of the church. If you have a ministry of a church like mine, it's 508c1a, then we're going to have a ministry where we can help these people out. I'll put the tent up there that I want because I'm not in commerce. I'm not doing business with the public. This is private. Anybody comes in that tent, they're going to be a beneficiary of the trust. And they can come in and don't be worried about the bloodhounds, the Dominican crusaders or inquisitors coming and finding you and shutting you down.
Okay. So this, I'm surprised nobody was murdered over this, because this could have come to bloodshed, because this is so stupid. The whole purpose was to basically destroy. No, it was to destroy these businesses.
That's right. It's to destroy the middle class. That's right, George. Born out of the Protestant Reformation.
So I may have said this to you before. So tying this back to Rome. Well, the chief legal officer for the county of Sonoma is a fellow by the name of Robert Pittman. Now he's a homosexual and he lives with his partner.
We should celebrate that, shouldn't we? That we have a queer running a city.
Well,
celebrate. Go ahead.
Well, he not only lives with his partner in one county, but he got his law degree from Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles.
Of course, because many of the Jesuits, that's what these men turn into when they live with each other. So, and they're teaching and whatever, and you're intolerant if you don't go along with same-sex marriage. Yeah, go ahead, George.
So the purpose of the legal officer in California, he's supposed to serve as the advisor to the board of supervisors. So he's the one who can tell them how much crime they can get away with. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. They say, well, yes, well, according to such and such code, you can basically rob people. And this is how tyranny we can shove down your throat.
You're distributing the wealth, George. I mean, how dare you have anything that somebody else doesn't have? You don't believe in redistribution of the wealth and reduction of everybody to the same cipher as C.S. Lewis writes in his great work, Screwtape Proposed the Toast. Screwtape Proposed the Toast, listeners. You got to get it. It's part of the Screwtape letters. And he talks about the demons telling to the other demons, you got to cut them all down to the same level. Let there be no great men. And that means we have to destroy the middle class with has private wealth. Got to destroy those people.
Well, okay. Well, yes, I understand. And so Robert Pittman, as I said, is the chief legal officer for Sonoma County. And so he's basically the thug of the county. that is his job. He's basically the commissar of Sonoma County.
Very good. Hey, good, George. We got to go. We've been on for an hour, almost 45 minutes. So.
I'm sorry.
It's all your fault. It's all your fault, George. That's why you're on this broadcast, so I can blame you for my mistakes. But if you want to sum it up and then give your contact info.
Okay, so anyhow, well, if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please email me at georgewidger1969@gmail.com. That's GEORWIDGER. People would like me to discuss a topic or go over a topic, or if you just want to say hello, please do so. And please let me know where you're writing from. And if you want to send me local articles or whatever, something that I may not have come across or I may have heard of, but I'd be interested in getting your local take on it. Because, I can hear about things that happen in North Carolina, but if you're there in Charlotte or Raleigh or whatever, for example, it's easier if you have local sources because they'll look at things from a different perspective from, say, a national source.
Amen. All right. So, George, so good to have you with us. And may the Lord bless you. The next time we're on, it's Brother Eric John Phelps, 24/7 World Radio with our podcast with Brother George Widger today on July the 23rd, 2024. And thank you for all your excellent information you give, George, and for enabling me to make a few comments that I think might be helpful to the listener. And lastly, appreciate your prayers, 2 minutes a day, lifting up holy hands without wrath. You're not mad at God, and without doubting his word. And you may wish to send a donation to rbpbchurch at comcast.net. Actually, I'll just send it to RBT, P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073, or you can send it to PayPal, which is rbpbdonate at comcast.net, or you can send it to Cash App at ERIC, Eric, John, Jon, Phelps, PHELPS, and that's my Cash App address. And any way that you'd like to give would be dearly appreciated, and we will continue to come to you in faith, trusting God, to tell the truth no matter what may happen. So until next time, may the Lord bless you to do his will according to his word. The AV 1611 Reformation Bible in its present edition of 1769. Till next time, Maranatha.